Okay. So welcome to Functionalism, Anomie, and Strain, Part 1. So this is a 3-part series that I expected at the beginning for it to be one video, but it ended up being bigger than that, so it's going to take up a bit more time. Also, I'm feeling slightly self-conscious. I have a black and white video filter on, and I feel like I should explain why. It's because the lighting's not great where I am right now, and the camera that I'm using is like really light saturated for some reason. And so if I don't use the black and white, it looks like my pasty head is glowing like a sun. It's really kind of impressive, but also terrifying. It's not a good look. So I went with the black and white. So it's really for your benefit. All right. So we're going to start with Durkheim and Anomie. We keep going back to Durkheim. Durkheim is a major figure in this field. So, we're always bouncing back to Durkheim. In this case, though, we're going to be talking about Durkheim's concept of anomie, which he has defined as a state of normlessness. I know that's a bit of a weird phrasing, but essentially we experience anomie when the norms that once governed our lives fall away. And once that happens, those norms the norms and social regulation that we normally are guided by goes away, and so we don't know what to do anymore. Also, there's no limits put on like what we want, right? So there's nothing taking our desires and kind of dampening them. We talked about with social norms previously that social norms largely regulate the degree to which we can express the things that we are feeling. So if I want to get up and eat, but I'm at work, I can't do that because I'm supposed to be following the rules at work. I mean, I can do it, but I'm probably not going to. If I'm in class and I need to go to the bathroom, I am probably not going to. I'm supposed to be suppressing my urges. Well, when norms go away, that suppression goes with it. So the limits on desire fall away. I'm going to focus more on the behavior aspect of it. It's just kind of more relevant here, but the desire part's part of what Durkheim talks about, so I wanted to throw it in there. And anomie, when people are in this situation, can generate deviance. So what the hell does this mean? Well, anomie can be at the social level. It can be at the societal level. So for instance, if a society's government or social structure just breaks down, so in the aftermath of a coup or in the middle of a pandemic, for instance, where the social system gets so overwhelmed, which didn't happen in the US, but let's say the system gets so overwhelmed that basic aspects of urban life fall away. So things like the garbage doesn't get picked up anymore. There are no police or firefighters or maintenance workers. Nobody's monitoring the roads. Nobody's teaching schools. Nobody's enforcing the rules, right? So nobody knows what to do or how to act. So deviance can occur in those situations. Anomie can also occur at the individual level, which is really much more important for what we're going to be talking about, not so much for Durkheim's theory, but for what we're going to be talking about. So individuals can experience anomie. So imagine, for instance, someone is very wealthy and then they lose all their money, right? They get wiped out, they're bankrupt. Well, that person knows how to live as a wealthy person. They know how to make investments. They know how to deal with owning lots of assets and living in a big house, but they don't know how to be poor. There's a skill set that comes along with being poor, and they don't have it, so they don't know what to do. They don't know how to function. Go the opposite way too, and this is very common actually when people living in poverty or people who aren't incredibly wealthy win the lottery. So the middle class or lower class folks win the lottery, they very often lose the money really, really quickly because they don't know how to live as a rich person. They don't know how to manage the money. They don't know how to manage the social relationships that come along, or the way social relationships are changed. So how do you manage when people around you need money and you have money, but you can't just give it all away because then you won't have any. But you don't know what to do, right? You don't know how to live in that space. Another situation, imagine you've been married for 50 years and your spouse dies, right? Like, you know how to live as a married person. You know how to live in the context of a relationship with another person. That person goes away and the norms that govern your behavior go away with that person. Now, over time, new norms will establish themselves. So the formerly wealthy person will learn how to live as a poor person. The poorer person who becomes wealthy will either learn how to live as a wealthy person or will sink back into their economic situation they lived in before, which is actually, again, super common. The widow or widower will find ways to function in their day-to-day lives. They'll adjust, right? New norms will establish themselves, and the enemy will go away. But for the individual, during that time when they're experiencing anomie, deviance can emerge out of that really, really easily. And we're going to talk about that why in a bit later. But for the moment, we're going to take an awkward segue that's just going to be like, feel like a big digression, but there's a reason why we're doing it, and talk about Davis and Moore's theory of inequality, which, as of right this second, has nothing to do with anomie, but it will in a little while. And so, I had to talk about the Durkheim stuff first, which we're going to swing around back to in a bit, but we have to take this like weird digression first. Talk about Davis and Moore's theory of inequality. So Davis and Moore are two researchers, sociologists, who were writing in 1945. So this is an older argument. They are structural functionalists, and they offer a structural functionalist argument concerning inequality. What's inequality? Well, I grabbed these definitions from the Open Education Sociology Dictionary, and I modified them. So these are my tweaks. But it's a pretty useful site, actually. And so they define inequality as the uneven distribution of opportunities and rewards that increase wealth, power, and prestige for individuals and groups. So inequality deals with this question of how are resources in any given society distributed. There is inequality if different people have access or control or ownership of different amounts of each research. Resource, different amounts of each resource. Words are hard. It's hard to get words from the brain to the mouth and then say them in the correct order. So I am learning every day, though, how to talk like a human. But we have inequality when there are differences in wealth, differences in power, differences in prestige. We'll talk about what those are in a second. And Davis and Moore are going to argue that we always see inequality in societies. I would say that that's maybe not always quite as true, but they're going to argue that we always see inequality. There's always some kind of uneven distribution of these things. And then there is the concept of stratification, which is a system of inequality based on ranking people or groups based on wealth, power, and prestige. So we have inequality itself, the state of there being uneven resources. And then we have stratification, which is a system that ranks people, right? So there's the state of people being not equal to each other in terms of access to resources and control of resources. And then we have a ranking system in which people are placed, okay? So there's the, inequality itself, and then there's the system, all right? So what are these? What do we mean when we talk about wealth, power, and prestige? A lot of times when we think about inequality, what comes to mind are financial resources. So we think about like rich versus poor. That is one of these categories, it's wealth. But there are other sources of inequality. There's other things that can be distributed unequally, okay? So wealth is the obvious one. So the total financial assets minus debt an individual or group possesses or controls. I tweaked this definition quite a bit, just so you know. So this comes down to financial wealth, right? How much money or things similar to money, like stocks, homes, all that combined together, all your financial assets minus your debt is your wealth, right? So how much wealth do you control? Do you have access to? Either as an individual or as a group, right? So at the individual level, wealth can be, my income combined with my investments, combined with a home, car, whatever I have. Or for like a corporation, it can be their revenue stream, their the assets that they own, their back inventory. Like it's a whole bunch of things that can come into this. But it's the money stuff, okay? And people vary pretty widely. We have people with spectacular amounts of wealth. We have people who are in abject poverty, and then we have everything in between. We have power, All right. Power is the ability of an individual, group, institution, that should be or institution, to influence or exercise control over other people and achieve their goals despite possible opposition or resistance. So essentially what we're saying here is power is the ability to get other people to do what you want them to do, even if those people don't want to do that, right? Now, people might want to do the thing that you want them to do, or they might not. Regardless, though, you can get them to do what you want. So the images that I have up here are of political figures. So there's political power, right? Is a way to get people to do what you want. There's General Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf right there. In the middle, he has had military power. You know, which is if you have military power, you can get a bunch of people to do what you want. You give orders, right? And then I have Elon Musk as a CEO, and just someone who's, Elon Musk is he's like this weird combination of he's awesome, but he's horrible. But regardless, as the CEO of a bunch of different companies, he has an enormous amount of power. Now, the images that I have up here are of the people who have extreme levels of power. But again, power is distributed in different ways. So there are people who have very little power or no power over their lives. And then there are people sort of in the middle. And then there's people at the top. It's like me, for instance. I have power in this context, in the concept of a classroom, because I can tell you what to do. I am guessing that a lot of people watching this probably weren't like, hey, I want to watch a video on Davis and Moore today. It's how I wanted to spend my morning, afternoon, evening, or night. That's what I wanted to do. But you're doing it because I told you to, right? You have to take exams and write papers because your instructors tell you to do that. Now you can choose to not complete the assignments, but then, you know, there are consequences to that, right? You don't pass classes, you don't get a degree, all that. So, you know, you might not want to watch the video, you might not want to write a paper, you might not want to take an exam, whatever it is, but you do it anyway, right? Because someone with power tells you to do it. So that's power. And then we have prestige. So the socially recognized admiration, honor, or respect attached to roles and statuses. So this is just how highly we think about people. So do we admire people in those positions? Do we respect them or do we not? So it's the difference between, for instance, being the Pope or being a doctor, which are both high status, high prestige positions, versus being something like a prostitute or someone who sells cigarettes on the street, right? So one is going to get really high levels of prestige and admiration and respect, and the others are not, right? Now, typically, when we talk about inequality and stratification and these different resources, we generally think about these kinds of resources, wealth, power, and prestige, as going together. So, for instance, we have Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. I probably should check before I open this up, but I don't know. I haven't been on top of pop culture for many, many years. So, but they are two people who have wealth, power, and prestige. That is very typical. Oftentimes, people with wealth have power, and people with wealth also have power and prestige. People with power also have wealth and prestige. They all tend to hang together, but not necessarily. Like I, for instance, as a college professor, I have a decent amount of prestige and, you know, a relatively limited form of power. I don't have a lot of wealth. College professors generally sacrifice wealth for things like, you know, personal freedom and control of their lives. So I do have, you know, other things, but I don't make a lot of money, but I do get a lot of social respect, often undeserved, but it's there. And I do have some power, and then I can, you know, control what people do. It's limited though. Imagine someone like Mother Teresa, right? She was that Catholic nun who worked in Calcutta with the poor, and she had really nothing in the way of financial power. She maybe had some political or no wealth, right? So no financial wealth. She had very little in the way of things like political power, but she had high prestige, right? generally wealth, power, and prestige all go together. And if you have one, you'll probably have the others, but that's not always true. Another one, like plumbers and carpenters, for instance, or contractors. Like my uncle's a contractor, and I've known lots of plumbers and electricians and things. Those types of positions tend to have kind of like middling to lower prestige, right? We don't necessarily think super highly of plumbers, which is awful. It's an incredibly skilled position or job, and it's hard and should be thought more highly of. But they make more money than a lot of people do. So like your average plumber is going to make more money than I do, but I get more prestige, right? I also have more power, but financially, I'm not going to have the same wealth that a successful plumber will have. So these three sources of inequality are connected, but it's not like they all go together perfectly all the time. So we talk about wealth, power, and prestige. Why are we talking about this? Well, we want to talk about this system of ranking. For Davis and Moore, since all societies, they're going to say, I mean, I would dispute this, but I'm presenting their argument right now. So, we're going to say that stratification and inequality have always existed and they exist in all societies. Well, if that's true, if that's the case, then it must be functional. It must be doing something. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. So their question is, well, how does stratification emerge within the context of societies? Right, like, and why? In what way does it serve the system? In what way is it functional? Right. So how does it emerge, and in what way does it serve the system as a whole? And so their argument is this, right? Society is built on a system of roles that people need to fill. So we could think about those roles in terms of jobs. Generally, don't have to be jobs, but they often are, right? So we need legislators to make laws. We need lawyers to go into court and argue about those laws. We need people running large organizations like corporations or running factories, that sort of thing. We also need people who are doing things like picking up garbage, cleaning our toilets, right? We have a whole bunch of different jobs that need to be done, okay? And they're all important, right? So we talked about the metaphor of the body in the last lecture, where you can't really say like the brain is more or less important than the heart, right? Because if you take either away, the entire body dies, right? So all of those positions are important, but some are more critical than others. And so the question is, how do you get, well, what we want is we want to get the so-called best people into the more critical roles. So we as a society have more interest, we have more invested in who becomes, say, a legislature or a president or a CEO or a doctor than we do in who becomes a janitor, right? This is a very classist sort of argument. And we want to make sure, again, Davis and Moore's argument, that we get the best people, right? The most talented, the people who are going to best help society operate in those high level positions, right? So we need those best people to take on those critical roles. And these different roles, again, we could think about them in terms of jobs, but they're not all jobs, but it's fine if we focus on jobs. These roles, these positions, they differ in their level of importance to society. So some are just more important than others. They differ in the degree to which they are enjoyable or pleasant or unpleasant. And they differ in the degree to which they require ability or training. And those positions that are the most important, the least pleasant, and require the most skill or ability, those are the positions that we want to get the best people into, right? Those that are less important, that are more enjoyable and that don't require a lot of skills or relatively unskilled, we don't need to worry so much about who's in those positions. And so let's kind of break this down a little bit. Like, what does it mean to be more important? Again, everything that comes out of my mouth, you should just add to that, according to Davis and Moore's argument, because this isn't my argument here. This is theirs, right? So, again, I'm presenting with their argument. So we talk about importance. People like scientists and doctors and presidents would be more important than people like janitors and people who are collecting garbage Again, big problems with that argument, but that's what they're saying. The people like scientists, doctors, and people with lots of political power, political influence, and so on. What they do is going to matter more for society as a whole than any individual, like janitor is going to matter. And so, they're more important, according to Davis and Moore. Positions differ in terms of how pleasant or unpleasant they are. Positions like logger, might be kind of a weird one, but I don't know if you're aware of this, but logging is the most dangerous job in the US. A lot of times we think about police work or something as being particularly dangerous, but police work actually isn't really high up on the list of the jobs that you can have that will get you killed. I mean, it's on there, but it's not super high. At the top of the list is logging. It's the most dangerous job. So we can certainly put that in the unpleasant category. Firefighting, I come from a firefighting family, so I've seen, the difficulty and the unpleasantness of firefighting. You go into buildings where the temperatures are absurdly high, you have lots of heavy equipment that you're carrying around, you see lots of suffering and, death, because firefighters are called to medical emergencies and road accidents, things like that. So you see a lot of awful things and people's lives are in your hand. So and so it's very high pressure, very, psychologically draining, physically draining. So it's unpleasant. And then I have an image of a coal miner here, which, I mean, you're deep underground, you're breathing in horrible black smoke that's like coating your lungs, right? It's a pretty unpleasant type of job. So the harder a job is in terms of or the less pleasant a job is, the more suffering involved, the more you have to kind of convince people to take those positions, right? And then there's different in terms of ability, right? What kind of skills do people need? So I have doctors. Doctors show up everywhere with these things. So the argument is that in order to be a doctor, you have to have high level skills. You need to have a lot of training. You need to have natural ability. You need to have just the right set of characteristics for it. So that's a position that requires more skill, training, and so on. Engineering, same thing, takes a lot of training, takes a lot of time and effort to build those skills. And for Davis and Moore, not everyone's going to be able to. They're not going to have the intellectual capacity or the physical capacity or whatever to take on different roles. And then we have Michio Kaku here, who's a theoretical physicist. He actually shows up in documentaries and stuff all the time. Pretty interesting guy. But he deals with this very high level, high concept math and, trying to unlock the mysteries of the universe. And so, it takes an enormous amount of ability and effort and training to get to that position. He actually built in his garage when he was a kid. What was it, like a particle accelerator or something? I don't know what it is. He blew his entire street's power grid. It was, pretty interesting guy. But it takes, he's not many people have that level of ability. And so we want someone like him to be a theoretical physicist. We don't want someone like him to be a janitor, right? Or at least Davis and Moore don't. So it is in our interest as a society to have the best people in those kinds of roles, right? Again, Davis and Moore. We want the so-called best to be serving in those positions. But how do we do that? How do we ensure that those who are going to be the best, those who are going to be most effective in those positions, how do we make sure that they are the ones who take those jobs? And so what we need to do is we need to motivate the best and the brightest, right? We need to figure out, okay, these are the people who are going to be the best, right? And we need to we need to motivate them to take on these critical positions, these critical roles, which sounds like it'd be pretty simple to do. All we need to do is we need to motivate people. We need to take those roles, those important positions, and we need to assign them. We need to reward them with wealth, prestige, and power, right? So if a job is really difficult, really high skilled, and really important, we will The idea is that we will reward it more. And we, want to motivate people, to motivate the best people to try to seek those rewards. There's a problem, though, even though this is an issue that sounds, simple to solve. There are pretty significant problems in that we don't know which people to motivate. So when we are, ideally, we'd be identifying the most capable people as soon as possible, and we'd be pouring our effort into them so that they can develop and become the best, legislature or best scientists that we can possibly make them. The problem is we don't know who the best and the brightest are. You walk into a classroom full of kids and you don't know which kids have the potential to take on these positions. Like, is it this kid? Is it this kid? Is it this kid? Is it this kid? Like, you don't know. So we don't know how to motivate the best and the brightest because we can't identify them early on. But if we don't motivate them from a young age, then they're not going to build those skills. They're not going to put the time and effort into things like school or extracurricular activities. They're not going to, take on those harder tasks unless they're motivated to do so, right? And they have to be motivated from a young age. So what do? We don't know which kids to motivate because we ideally would only motivate the kids who are going to be able to achieve wealth, power, and prestige, right? We don't want to motivate somebody to achieve wealth, power, and prestige if they can't ever get to it. So we need to find the right kids, motivate them, and then reward them, okay? But we don't know which kids to motivate. We don't know which individuals to motivate. We don't know. We don't know how to do that. We have no way of knowing in advance who's going to be best suited for these, so-called more important positions. So we're never going to know which of these kids is the best until they've already gone through the educational system. They've already had the opportunity to develop skills and so on. So we are left in this position where, since we don't know which kids are going to be the best, we have to motivate all of them. We have to make all of those kids want those high prestige, power, and wealth, and those positions that provide a lot of wealth. We have to take all of those kids and we have to make them all want to achieve wealth, power, and prestige. So we can't just identify like the best and the brightest. We can't find them and motivate those kids. We have to motivate all of the kids so that the best and the brightest will be dedicated, they'll work hard, and their ability and their skill and their capacity to deal with difficulty and unpleasantness will emerge, right? We have a problem though, because we're not just motivating those kids, we're motivating everybody. So what do we do with all of the people who we have socialized throughout their entire lives to want wealth, power, and prestige, but who won't be able to acquire them? So not everyone can be a CEO. Not everyone can be a president or a scientist or whatever. We need people who are going to do things like clean toilets. Who are going to do things like pick up garbage. Those things that we don't think of as being as important or as being high status, whatever. But we still need those jobs filled. But what we've done is we've motivated everybody to want to be the CEO, to want to be the scientist, to want to be the doctor, to want to be the successful musician, to want to be, like wildly successful and want wealth and want power and want prestige, despite the fact that they're not going to be able to get it, right? In a society that is unequal and stratified. So what do we do? What happens to all of them? And that's what we're going to talk about in part 2. We're going to build on this, and we're going to talk about, what happens to those people. So expect that in a bit. I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop recording. So I will see you for the next one. I won't see you because this is a recording and I can't see through time or through the screen. But metaphorically, I will see you for the next one.